this. And I want to thank you for your kindness, for your friendliness, and for your wise guidance that you give to myself and many others in this House. I wish you God bless, Mr. Speaker. I wish you Godspeed. Thank you for all that you do and did, and wish you every success for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sir John Hay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, for the Leader of the House, I'm coming to you, but first for the Leader of the House. William Morris said that the very foundation of refinement includes green trees, flowery meads and living waters outside. And my constituents in Market Deeping seek just those things as they crave open spaces. And I hope the Leader of the House, in the time available, there are 2 more days after all, will allow for an urgent statement on how planning policy guidance can be altered so that such open spaces are provided for communities like those in the Deepings, so that future generations may have the chance to choose to work, play, rest and enjoy at their leisure. Now you, Mr. Speaker, my friend, my wife said to me, she said, how will you manage when John goes? I said, I have no idea. I'll have to compete on equal terms. Mr. Speaker, John Ruskin said, no cultivation of mind can make up for a want of natural abilities. And you, sir, have no such want. Indefatigable, irrepressible, incomparable, you certainly are. But much more than that. In a time in which our politics is an unhappy marriage of hysterical hyperbole and technocratic turgidity, you have brought theatre to this place and life and art to your role. Now, there are some people on this side of the chamber who see that art as a sort of Jackson Pollock with a touch of Damien Hirst. But I see you more as Van Gogh, a vibrance and vividity, a colour and theatricality, which reveals rather than conceals sensitivity and deep humanity, for those are your qualities. Many people have spoken about your achievements, the Education Centre and the change in balance between the House and the Executive, prominent amongst them. But it is that business, that business of making this place alive, relevant, giving our proceedings that very theatricality which gives life to our democracy, which will be your most lasting legacy. That is why you are so widely known outside this place and widely admired by the way too. And I thank you profoundly for that. For as our polemic becomes increasingly strange, brutish, cruel, as a result of social media, which I understand takes place on computers. I've never seen it myself, but I understand takes place on computers and other sort of devices. As that effect has had its mark, you have stood proud from it. I thank you for all you've done, and I thank you for your friendship, which of course I hope and trust will endure long beyond the roles we now play. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm almost beyond words. I'm extraordinarily grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I do beg the Leader of the House's pardon, of course, the Leader of the House.
So sorry, and good heavens, our right honourable friend was as beautifully eloquent as ever. In his first request for a debate on open spaces and a statement, I could bring his attention to the adjournment debate that will take place on Tuesday, to which I will be responding. The only drawback is that that is primarily for right honourable members who are retiring, a category into which I hope my right honourable friend is not tempted to fall.
Yes. Yes. It may well depend upon the interpretive approach taken by the chair. It will not be me, but we shall see what happens. But I note what the Leader said. Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I haven't prepared anything, but I just need to say that, first of all, I won't be here for the tributes to the chaplain, but the House's loss is, I'm afraid, Canterbury's gain, so I am absolutely thrilled that, that I will get to see much more of Rose Wilkin in my constituency, so that's brilliant. It's so difficult to put into words what seeing you in the chair means to people like me and on the backbenches. And some of these speeches have just been incredibly moving. I think I need to find a new word for kindness. And I think if we look in Hansard today, the word that will have come up the most is that one. I don't know how to express my gratitude for how immensely patient and lovely you've been. I don't want to get too emotional, but my father has Alzheimer's and his recent memories are not that great, but he will never forget and never stops talking about the day that I was sworn in and how kind you were to my very ordinary family who'd never set foot in a place like this. You made an effort to sort of wave to them and mention them, and my dad was talking about it even yesterday when we were at a family funeral. So it meant a great deal to him and my family, and that's something that I will never forget. But when those of us who are here, especially women and backbenchers who are pretty terrified of this experience, get up and talk about things that are personal and make us vulnerable, the fact that I can stand here and look at you and you are a bit like a lighthouse in a really stormy sea, and you, in my speech that I made recently, where I felt very vulnerable, you kept me going, and I just kept concentrating on you, and I knew that you were there, sort of emotionally holding my hand, which you've done physically as well, which is lovely. And I don't know how to thank you enough, but I'm trying to say thank you, and I'll never ever forget your kindness, and thank you very much.
Honourable Lady doesn't have to thank me at all. It's been a great privilege, as in respect of every other colleague, but I hugely appreciate what she's said, which is said with evident and palpable sincerity. I will come to the Honourable Gentleman in due course. Does the Honourable Gentleman want to come in on this? Yes, Craig McKinley.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to speak today, and this is a very special day for you. And I just wanted to put on record a couple of my times with you. I recall, and I think I mentioned it to you when you first shook my hand when I took up my place here in 2015, that we had a tea together some many, many years ago, I think when perhaps you were in a different place politically, but we'll put that aside. But there was one kindness I think you gave me, and actually you've earned me a few pennies whilst being in this house, because I'm not always the first to be called, I'm not always the last, but I've earned many a good coin from the Honourable Gentleman from North West Leicestershire, because we often have a little bet as to who's going to be up last. So I'm very grateful to you for adding to my wealth and detracting from the wealth of my honourable friend. But I do recall, after my very difficult experience at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and I knew that you took a great interest in that throughout, the day after my acquittal, we had business questions, and I came to speak to you at the chair and say, I have rather more to say than would be appropriate at the business questions. And you did indeed allow me, on that very special day for me, the opportunity to express in far more minutes than one would usually allow for business questions, to explain what I'd been through and the annoyance thereof. And for that basis, there's lots that I haven't agreed with you over the last few years, but on that basis, your fairness to me and to others in the House who face difficulties, I will never forget. And it was a great opportunity to put on record in this great international public space what I'd been through and the annoyances I'd felt. So I thank you for that, probably for that occasion more than any other since my time in the House, and I wish you every great success in the future, a long life and much happiness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That is extremely gracious of the Honourable Gentleman, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart. Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for the great city of Southend was right when he said earlier that today is a day where the House comes together to say a fond farewell. And there are so many to whom we can say a fond farewell, indeed some in the chamber, Anne from Kinnan Valley, Jim from Coventry. But can I add just one additional fond farewell? And that's to the remarkable Right Honourable Member for Meriden, Caroline Spellman. She is a truly outstanding parliamentarian who was prepared to put the national interest of over narrow party political interest. She is somebody who is lionised by Jaguar workers and by Land Rover workers as we've worked together to defend the interests of our manufacturing base against the background of Brexit. She will be sorely missed. Mr. Speaker, yours has been a remarkable trajectory. From being a man in an organisation that was so right-wing that even Norman Tebbit abolished it, through being a fully paid-up Macmillanite, to I know not where. And I know not where because you do not wear your politics or your prejudices on your sleeve. You are, Mr. Speaker, truly impartial. In 600 years of our parliamentary democracy, there have been few champions of Parliament as great as you, writing a noble chapter in the history of Parliament, including crucially enabling Parliament to hold the executive to account. That may sometimes be frustrating for the front bench opposite. There's been time, and no doubt, from the times when the Right Honourable member for Downton Abbey, the leader of the House, might expressed his concerns and frustrations, but what you have done is to hold the executive to account, allow Parliament to hold the executive to account. And you've done that without suffering the fate of some of your predecessors who literally lost their heads. You've been a great champion of parliamentarians, but there's no question about it. Reference has been made to this earlier on. Our country is deeply divided. Sadly, we see a politics of hate on the march, sometimes manifested in attacks upon parliamentarians. You've been a champion of parliamentarians, including on that front. But also, you've been a champion of reaching out to the country. At troubled times, truly a bridge over troubled waters. You've been a champion also of opening up Parliament. You've built a brilliant team on the one hand, including the wonderful Rose, reflecting the rich diversity of our capital city and our country. But on the other hand, you've also been a champion of opening up Parliament to young people. And I'll never forget your powerful addresses at the 4 Erdington Youth Parliaments. And I remember meeting a group of apprentices from the Erdington Skills Centre the week after, and one of them said, "That bloke, Bercow, he is really something, is he not?" And as a consequence of what you've done, thousands, tens of thousands of young people have come to the cradle of our democracy, and they've loved every moment. Mr. Speaker, you're somebody with a remarkable Shakespearean turn of phrase, a rhetorical flourish, the like of which I don't think I've ever heard. But you're somebody who's also been a humble individual, reaching out to those often suffering difficulties in their life, in their career, in Parliament. There are so many here today who will never ever forget your kindness when kindness was desperately needed. And if I can just say this in conclusion, you're not just one of Parliament's greatest speakers, who in centuries to come will be remembered like some of the great figures of the past. You're a family man, a profound family man, but also, Mr. Speaker, forgive me if I say this, you're just a plain, decent man. We will never, ever forget you.
I'm immensely obliged to the honourable gentleman. As he knows, I've told him many times how much I appreciate his support, and I do so again in the public square this afternoon. Thank you.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, before turning to you, can I just make the point that there's been unconfirmed bad news about my constituent Amelia Bambridge. Can I say that everyone has wished she be found alive and well? I ask that people use sensitivity and common sense to avoid circulating distressing images. Can I say that as technically the longest serving Conservative Member of Parliament, though the Father of the House I think still would be properly having that title. But from me to the most recent person elected to this House, we acknowledge all the good that you've done and the good that's been done while you've been Speaker. For those who want to write you off in retirement, I have to warn them that in 1856, Cromwell found out that a unicameral parliament was a bad idea. 1656, forgive me. And he created the other house. They couldn't decide on the title, which is why we use the expression the other house for the House of Lords. And in the last 353 to 361 years, we have relied on some of the words that Speaker Lenthal used. He actually went from this chamber to the other house and then came back as Speaker. And that, of course, is open to you if you want to break precedent in more ways than you have already. When a decision was taken in the chair by you, I put down an early day motion, or I submitted an early day motion to the clerks, giving a direction that it shouldn't happen again. And they, I think, humorously, at least I assume it's humorously, said, how could I do that? So I said, what were the only words people could remember about a previous Speaker? And they were Lenthal's words, that he could only do what the House directs. And if that's true, putting down a motion to give a direction to the occupant of the chair would seem perfectly proper, and it was accepted. I want to say that although you weren't my first choice in the year that you were elected as Speaker, I honour you, and I praise Sir George Young for asking you and you agreeing that he could have his party in your House. I think that shows the mood and the friendship that exists in this place, and that has continued strongly with you as Speaker. I explained to my constituents that had they chosen you rather than me in Worthing West in 1996, they could have been represented by the Speaker for the last 10 years. And when one of them said his tenure of 10 years seems rather longer than the 9 years, I said he did say he was going after 9 years, and 10 years is after 9 years, isn't it? And if any pedant uses the words you actually put in your letter, I shall criticise them for being too pernickety. I've dragged you to the chair twice. We don't have to drag you out of it because you are... because you've chosen the time to leave, and I think that as people heard from me privately a year ago, that you deserved a margin of appreciation. I think that those who would want to make a great fuss about the time you've been in the chair are wrong, although I think that at some calm period we may want to discuss whether there should be a normal expectation that the Speaker will do up to 9 years, as you had once indicated. I think it would also be a useful idea if we could have a debate in some period of calm as to whether we should have a regular discussion, perhaps every 2 years, on the way that the chair is occupied and decisions are made, because I think that it's one of the areas where I think we can contribute, and the occupant of the chair can consider, and the procedure committee, whether much can be done about that. There are a few things that people don't know about what you do, but the one that was mentioned by my honourable friend for Norfolk about your relationship with your own constituents, I think is worth mentioning. During the HS2 Select Committee considering objections, we went round with you on a number of occasions, and I think people who only see you in public will not know what you're like in private with your constituents. The Speaker is knowledgeable, he's calm, he's reasonably quiet, and people trust him. And that, I think, is what people can ask of their members of Parliament, and the service you've given to them should be remembered in these tributes today. There are other things I could say, but I think the best thing to do is to say that the good you've done should be remembered, the good that we've done you've acknowledged, and were there to be a signal on a motion, we hope that it will be passed with acclamation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for occupying the chair.
Well, let me thank the honourable gentleman who has made the concluding contribution from the backbenches, and in thanking him, I want to register the view that, in addition to all his other attributes, the honourable gentleman is a gentleman. What he has said is very much appreciated by me, and it will not be forgotten. I do want to thank colleagues. This is quite an embarrassing experience, and people watching may think it bizarre or surreal, but it is a procedure that very often takes place. It was opened with considerable elan, style and good humour by the Leader of the House. The Leader of the House is one who always places a premium upon the Chamber and regards his overriding duty as to be in it whenever possible. If that were true as a backbencher, it is true almost in triplicate for the holder of a designated office. Most assuredly, it is true for the holder of the office of Leader of the House, when business to which he is speaking is involved. Notwithstanding that fact, I do think that the Leader deserves some appreciation for staying from the very start to the very close of this series of exchanges, which has been genuine and sincere, but also long. So I thank the Leader of the House very much indeed, and I would like to thank all colleagues who have spoken. All colleagues who've spoken. They don't owe me anything. And indeed, but I thank them for what they've said. And the honourable gentleman on the Treasury bench says, and those who can't. Well, he and I have known each other a long time. And I told him the other day outside of the chamber how impressed I was by the way in which he conducted himself at the dispatch box. Anybody would have thought that he'd been a minister for many, many, many years, as opposed to virtually an ingenue. But I thank the honourable gentleman for his sedentary chunter. We now come to motion number 1, colleagues, on standards. The Leader of the House to move.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion standing in my name on the order paper. Today's motion follows the publication of the Committee on Standards' first report of this session on the conduct of the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East. And I've been asked to say that he cannot be here today to listen to this because he is currently in hospital. The report was agreed by the Standards Committee following a process of investigation and consideration by recognised due process and was published on Monday the 28th of October. The Government has sought to schedule a debate as quickly as possible, as is the usual practice. It is always regrettable when a motion such as this is before the House. The matter before us today has been investigated by the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards and now reported on by the Committee on Standards. I thank the former Commissioner, Catherine Hudson, and the current Commissioner, Catherine Stone, for their work. I also thank the Honourable Lady, the Member for Stretford and Urmston, Chairman of the Committee on Standards, and the other members of the Committee for their work in producing this report. The motion approves the report of the Committee on Standards, endorses the recommendation of the Committee, and proposes that the Right Hon Member for Leicester East be suspended from the service of the House for a period of 6 months. I commend this motion to the House.
Mr. Nicholas Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I'm replying for the opposition. Before I do so, can I say to you, sir, that I want to identify myself with absolutely everything my right honourable friend, the Shadow Leader of the House, said in tribute to yourself. You've been an outstanding Speaker. You deserve the gratitude of us all. And I know to be praised by the opposition Chief Whip is probably not going to help your standing with your colleagues, but let's face it, just between the two of us, you know, it's probably too late to make amends. I can truthfully say that nobody, Mr. Speaker, is going to miss you more than I. Now, to turn to the matter at hand. This is a sad day for us, and for me personally, because I'm friends with the member who is criticised. However, we accept the report, accept the findings, and accept the recommendations in full. I want to say thank you to my friend, the member for Stretford and Urmston, for chairing the hearings. I want to say thank you to both commissioners who have conducted the investigation, and I want to say thank you to the committee, and a particular thank you to the lay members of the committee. The introduction of laity into affairs of this kind was controversial. It seems to be working well, and certainly I accept the report on behalf of my party and the obvious consequences in full.
Thank you. The question is the motion on standards as on the order paper. Ordinarily, I would go to the other side of the House, but it does seem appropriate to call the chair of the Standards Committee first, and I hope that the honourable gentleman would accept that. Kate Green.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. May I start by adding my very, very warm tribute to you as an exceptional speaker over all the time that I have been in Parliament. And I'm very sorry to be contributing to this short debate this afternoon. I thank the Leader of the House for bringing forward the resolution before dissolution next week. I want to assure the House, first of all, that the committee has taken the very greatest possible care, both with all of the information that has been put before us, and that we have done our very best only to focus on issues which pertain to the code of conduct of this House and to no extraneous matters of personal and private conduct, nor indeed have we wanted to put any information into the public domain other than where it has been absolutely necessary to explain the reasoning for the committee's decision. The decision is unanimous. We have accepted the recommendations of the current Commissioner, and we're very grateful to her for her work and indeed for the work of the previous Commissioner. And I want to put on record my personal thanks to all my colleagues on the committee and indeed to my clerk and his staff. I just wanted to make 2 points, Mr. Speaker, very, very quickly. The first is that the Right Honourable Member for Leicester East has put some information subsequent to our report onto his website. I need to assure the House that all of the points raised in that posting are addressed within the committee's report. And the second thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, is that while I and my committee appreciate that, of course, no Parliament constitutionally can bind the actions of the next Parliament, it has been our view, and we've placed this on the record in a letter to the Leader, which is on our committee website, that should the Right Honourable Member be returned to the House at the forthcoming election, we would urge that the incoming Parliament and the new Leader of that Parliament passes a resolution as quickly as possible to ensure that the full period of the sanction that we propose is served. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the chance to contribute this afternoon.
Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for an opportunity to speak in this debate. And although I am the originator of the original complaint to standards back in September 2016, I do rise more in sorrow than anger to comment on these matters. And I would also like to thank the Commissioner for Standards, Catherine Stone, for her diligent work on these matters on our behalf, protecting the reputation of this House, also her predecessor, Catherine Hudson, and indeed all the elected and lay members of the Standards Committee. So after 37 months, we have the report. It's 69 pages, and it's indeed grim reading for any honourable colleagues who have taken the time to wade through it. The recommendations of the Standards Committee are the longest suspension handed out since records began, a 6-month suspension which would, in normal times, trigger a recall, and also the fact that they've said that the member for Leicester East should not be offered a former member's pass when his time ceases in this House. But I think what is clear as to why this investigation has taken so long, and I think it's been quite damning on the character for the member for Leicester East, is the delays, the deflection and the confusion that he appears to have, the committee believe that he is conducted to drag out these proceedings to a position where if the member for Leicester East does not stand at the next election, that none of the punishments will be meted out to him. He will have avoided a suspension if the House decides to accept the recommendations. They will be only for a few days, not the 6 months. And therefore there will be no recall. And effectively the only censure he will face is not having the privilege of a former member's pass when he ceases to be here. I'm very aware that the member concerned, the member for Leicester East, is not present. And the chair of the Standards Committee has hinted at a statement that he has put out immediately after the publication of this report on his website. And in fairness to the member for Leicester East, and for the information of this House, I would like to read that statement out to the House, Mr. Speaker. So this is posted out on the 28th of October, shortly after the release of the Standards Committee report into his conduct, on his website currently. The events of the 27th of August 2016 were purely personal and private and occurred in circumstances where neither Mr Vaz's public nor his parliamentary role were engaged. Mr Vaz has never bought, possessed, dealt or used illegal drugs. He has a cardiovascular condition which would mean that were he to consume any non-prescribed drugs, he would in all likelihood die. The Commissioner has confirmed that Mr Vaz has not committed any criminal acts. The referrals made, including by Andrew Bridgen MP, were a waste of police resources. The transcript of the recordings which the Committee and Commissioner rely on has been completely discredited by a highly qualified forensic scientist who has cast considerable doubt on its reliability. She stated, and I quote, "Overall, the transcripts applied to me fell significantly short of what is expected in terms of a transcript intended for use in legal, disciplinary or similar proceedings, and it cannot be considered a reliable evidential record of the speech content of the questioned recordings." It goes on. Mr Vaz has cooperated at all stages of this process. At no stage during the inquiry either Commissioner stated in writing or otherwise that Mr Vaz has been uncooperative. Commissioner Hudson stated in terms that Mr Vaz has been helpful. Mr Vaz vigorously rejects the allegation that he failed to cooperate with the inquiry. To the contrary, he holds the standard system in the highest regard and with the highest respect. It then goes on to give some links to reports from the inquiry available on the parliamentary website and indicates where people reading the statement should look in the report for various statements that that the Honourable Member for Leicester East regards as evidential to support his statement, and it completes with Keith Vaz has been treated for a serious mental health condition for the last 3 years as a result of the events of the 27th of August 2016. He has shared his medical reports in confidence with the committee. He has today been admitted to hospital and his office will not be making any further comments. I think, having read the report, that there is no apology from the member for Leicester East. No hint of apology. No hint of regret. A complete denial of the unanimous conclusions of the Standards Committee. And that may hint at his mental state of mind. He is in complete denial to what the level of dissatisfaction the public have with the behaviour of some of the members of this House, and he has certainly detracted from our reputation. Mr Speaker, there have been many tributes to you today, and I would wish to add my own, in that if you'd acted on the letter I wrote to you in September 2015, a year before the incident of the then Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, where I raised my concerns with you that the actions of and activities of the then Chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, if they came to light, would risk seriously damaging
gentleman will resume his seat. This matter was raised on a previous occasion, and I am going to say in all solemnity and with firmness to the honourable gentleman and to the House what the position is. I could not have known that the honourable gentleman intended to use this debate in the way that he has thus far done, in an orderly fashion, but in a way that I could not have predicted. I certainly couldn't have anticipated, and the honourable gentleman didn't do me the courtesy of telling me that he intended to address my reaction to these matters. But I will say to the House that I do recall, I don't have the detail in front of me, I do recall the honourable gentleman writing to me, highlighting his concerns about the right honourable gentleman, the member for Leicester East, and imploring me to act. And I indicated to the honourable gentleman, in terms, both on the basis of my own knowledge, I say to the House, of the role and responsibility of the chair, and on the strength of the professional advice of the clerk of the House, that it was not, repeat, not, for me to intervene in any way, shape or form. The premise upon which the request by the honourable gentleman for me to intervene was based was entirely, and I emphasise entirely, misplaced. It is not for the Speaker to get involved in the study of or investigation into complaints that are made about individual members of Parliament. It is not for the Speaker to perform a second job as a kind of nighttime Columbo, looking into matters that one member wants to raise about another. That is not only not necessary, it is not appropriate. It is totally out with, I say with complete clarity and for the avoidance of doubt, it is totally out with the role of the Speaker. If after 9.5 years in this place, notwithstanding my best efforts to help the honourable gentleman to do better, he still labours not merely under the misapprehension, but under the ignorant delusion that it is somehow the responsibility of the chair to intervene, frankly, I have to say to colleagues, I can't help him. I can't help him. I've tried to help the honourable gentleman. I've tried on many occasions to educate the honourable gentleman. But if the honourable gentleman won't be helped or educated, I can't do anything about that. But what I can do something about, and I have sought to do so for 10 years, is securing compliance with the procedures of this House. It is absolutely legitimate for the honourable gentleman to speak in this debate if he thinks it's proper to do so, and if the honourable gentleman feels that the general approach that he's adopted to these sorts of matters, i.e. allegations of misconduct against other members, enhances his standing in the House, it is entirely for him to make that judgment. If he thinks it makes him a more popular or respected member to spend quite a lot of time writing to the Standards Commissioner, complaining about this one or that one or the other one, if that's the approach to parliamentary service, or part of the approach to parliamentary service for which the honourable gentleman opts, that is his privilege. And if he wishes to speak in this debate, including when I have resumed my seat, he is welcome to do so. I think he might usefully make a judgment about whether the House wants to hear him at great length, when there is a clear judgment by the committee, which has been accepted, which has been endorsed by the opposition chief whip. If he still feels he wants to speak at some considerable length and it makes him feel better and he thinks what an excellent contribution he's made, that's his prerogative. What the honourable gentleman won't do is breach the rules of this House and tell me, I say, not least to members of the public, what the job of the chair is. I know what the job of the chair is, and I've done it to the best of my ability. And to err is human, so I make my mistakes, but I've done it to the best of my ability for over a decade. And I don't simply assert or suggest I state with complete confidence that it is not part of my job to make representations to a member that because of this rumour or that rumour or this allegation or that allegation or this person disliking him or that person disliking him, therefore it would be best if he stood down from the chairmanship of his select committee. That is not the responsibility of the Speaker of the House of Commons. And if the honourable gentleman still thinks otherwise, I fear he's beyond redemption in the matter. I mean, I'd like to help him, but he just doesn't want to be helped. Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
Speaker, I thank you for your advice. As always, for the last 10 years, you have advised me on many occasions. But had you waited for my conclusion, you would have seen that I was going to extol your decision not to get involved in this matter. Because had you done so, we may well have protected the reputation of this House, but I doubt we ever would have got to see the full report that is now before us, Mr. Speaker. And the answer is